Hi, I'm Dr. J. Varma, and welcome to Thermometer. On this channel, I check the temperature of health in the United States and around the world, and I give you expert insights on infectious diseases and public health. And I'm pleased today to welcome a friend and colleague, Dr. Jon Epstein, a virologist, veterinarian, and disease ecologist who, like me, has spent his life tracking dangerous diseases around the world. Hey, Jon, how are you doing today?
Jay, I got to tell you, I'm so excited for today's show, and you haven't even introduced the topic yet, and I can barely contain myself. But
I can
I'm
imagine
great.
because
I'm great.
what we're going to be talking about is one of the most feared animals on earth. And
Humans.
we thought we would do a special episode on this, one, because it gets John giddy, but two, because it really touches on, I think, three health related topics that I think almost every American cares about in some way. One is infectious diseases. The second is cancer. And the third is longevity, how to live a long life. And it turns out that these really fearsome, grotesque animals that I want nothing to do with actually have something to do with all three of these. All right, so
Jay,
John, so why are you posing in a picture like this? Tell us
okay,
about
so here's where I'm going to turn your whole world upside down and tell you how amazing bats are. And so, we're talking about viral diseases in association with bats. And that, of course, has been the basis of my research over the past 25 years. And this is a picture of me as part of a research study of Pteropus medius, or the Indian flying fox. This is one of the largest fruit bat species on Earth. It's the largest flying mammal on the planet. And this photo was taken in Bangladesh, where we had a long-term field site studying Nipah virus in these bats. But I have to back up and say there are lots of reasons to love bats, and there's already a lot of reasons why people don't. And so I'm really glad to hear you say that you've got some reservations about bats, and we'll see if by the end of the show I can turn you around. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start by saying, because we were talking a little bit about this before, that
yeah,
you were like, well, Jay, you probably don't like bats for the same reason that all people do, because they seem kind of freaky. Like, they're flying around at
yeah,
night, they have wings, they look like rodents. And I tried to make the point to you that yes, those things bother me, but not quite as much as the average person. Like, I can see a rat walking on the streets of New York or walking in the subway of New York City. It doesn't freak me out. I get freaked out because I know
yeah,
the risk that they pose for a number of very dangerous infections.
yeah.
So my family has always made fun of me because we lived around the world. So we always get to go on kind of cool, hiking trips to kind of remote rural areas in countries around the world. And there was always some reason a cave visit thrown into a lot of these trips. And I would just be like, no, I don't want to go in there because I don't want to get bitten by a bat. So in my
Okay.
defense, it's an infectious disease worry more than it is these are too freaky.
And the concept of being bitten is really to do with the notion of rabies. That's the disease that most people associate with bats for good reason. Most bat species carry some type of lyssavirus. That's a group of viruses that includes classical rabies, which we have here in the United States in our bats. And the truth of the matter is, for time immemorial, bats have been associated with fearful mythology. They're creatures of the night. And part of the reason that they're so, I think, fear inducing is they do look strange, and there are lots of different types of bats, but they're cryptic. They're active at night when we're usually not. So we don't see bats very often. They live in caves. You have to go in there looking for them, unless you happen to have them in your house. And, there's a lot that people don't understand about them. And when a bat is infected with rabies and actually symptomatic, this is one of the viruses that does cause disease in bats, they start to behave erratically and abnormally like any rabid animal. And that's when bats are likely to, bite people, because they go through this sort of furious stage of rabies infection. But normally, bats would never seek contact with people. They are prey animals. These are animals that spend their whole lives trying not to get eaten by other things like raptors or snakes or other carnivores, that may be around bat caves. So generally speaking, bats want to leave people alone. They don't get in your hair and they don't try to bite you. So we're already like on the back foot when we're talking about bats. But here's why they're so incredible. First of all, when we talk about bats, and this is really important, it is not one type of animal. There are more than 1,400 different species of bats out there. Okay, bats represent 1/5 of all mammalian diversity on the planet. One out of every 5 species is a bat species. Okay, so it's a really diverse group of animals, and they live everywhere we do on all 6 continents. So even though we don't often see bats, they are always around us, and they perform some really vital ecological services. And
Can I interrupt you just for a second, John? I think one of the things that related to that, this sort
yeah.
of abundance of bats around the world,
Mhm.
I think, just going back to COVID for a little bit, where there was this just incredible resistance and continues to be, it's probably hardening to believe that, bats are the origin of a lot of emerging diseases, has
Right.
to do, I think, particularly in places like the US, where the average person doesn't actually interact with bats or see bats at all
Right.
regularly, views them as incredibly rare. And so therefore is like, how can this extremely rare creature also be one? So is there something about bat density in, say, North America or the United States that is different? Or is it simply that because such a large percent of the population maybe lives in urban areas, that's where that image comes from?
No, not particularly. Bat ecology really varies by species, but we happen to have one of the biggest bat roosts in the world here in North America, in Texas, at Bracken Cave, where more than 20 million Mexican free-tailed bats will come roost. Okay.
Wow.
So that's not only the largest bat population, it's the largest aggregation of mammals in the world, 20 million. Okay. So
Wow. 20 million at any given time. Wow. That's
that's
unbelievable.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. So we certainly have our share of bats, and depending on where in the world you go. But I guess the point of talking about different bat species, when we get to talking about viruses, is that any given species of animal has its own microbial flora, its own viruses and bacteria and fungi that have co-evolved with it and are associated with it. And depending on the species, and depending on the viruses, a selection of those may have the ability to jump hosts and get into other animals and people. And so, when we talk about prominent diseases we've associated with bats outside of rabies, Ebola, COVID, the original SARS coronavirus, Nipah virus, okay, these come from different types of bats in different places. Nipah is large fruit bats like the one I showed you, South and Southeast Asia. The coronaviruses tend to be associated with horseshoe bats. That's SARS and SARS-CoV-2, which are common in Southeast Asia and China, southern China. So they emerged there. But it isn't that there's any one type of bat that carries all these nasty viruses. It's that there's so many types of bats, and some small proportion of those viruses are able to jump into people, and sometimes they cause disease.
Yeah, but I think one of the things that's unique about bats that is their immune systems are very, very different than other mammals, right? And isn't that one of the reasons why, or at least postulated why, they're able to carry these pathogens that are incredibly dangerous and lethal to humans without themselves apparently getting sick from them?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question that really has had a different answer 5 or 6 years ago than it does now. Bats have been studied for a long time by biologists. They're fascinating animals, and what I wanted to say before but didn't, I'm going to throw it in and then I'll answer your question, is that ecologically bats are fundamentally so important for pest control. So insect-eating bats, which are the majority of bat species, eat thousands of tons of insects every single night, particularly those that damage our crops, like moths and beetles, and mosquitoes, which can transmit disease to people. So bats provide incredible pest control services naturally. And in the absence of bats, we're forced to use chemical pesticides. So there's real reason to protect bats there. Fruit-eating bats, like the one I showed in the picture, there's a whole range of species that eat fruit, nectar. These are incredible seed dispersers and pollinators. So in the tropics, bats are responsible for about half of the rainforest out there. So also incredibly valuable. So I do want to say, as part of the why bats are awesome discussion, they do really important things for us, and we couldn't live without them.
Yeah.
Now,
So we can't live without them, but
but
sometimes they are looking to, well, they're not intentionally looking to destroy us, but
no,
sometimes the viruses that live in their microbiome um, do put us at risk. So what is it about bats that makes them
okay.
able to carry all these different species?
Okay, and it's good that you don't couch it as some kind of deliberate intent. We accidentally get exposed to bat viruses, typically because of our own behavior and our own activities that put us into closer contact. So a lot of these viruses, we talk about Ebola and the coronaviruses and Nipah virus, we get exposed to them indirectly through contaminated food or entering into a habitat where we might inhale aerosolized, droplets carrying virus. So it is not direct contact with bats most often. But why do bats carry such viruses that make other animals and people really sick? Well, the reason I said 5 years ago is a different answer is what we've learned just recently by studying bat immune systems, which is a pretty nascent field of research, is that bat immune systems actually do function differently from other mammals, including people. When we get sick, when we get infected with a pathogen, bacterial or viral, a lot of the disease we experience is because of our body trying to fight off that pathogen and clear it. That's inflammation, which leads to fever. And these are things that help make our body inhospitable to the virus. The mobilization of inflammatory white cells, which help clear viruses and bacteria, can also cause inflammation and be very damaging internally, right? So often the symptoms we experience are due to the response to the infection. What we've discovered recently is that bats, over evolutionary time, have lost the genes that are responsible for the inflammatory cascade, the process by which inflammation occurs. So they have a functional immune system. They have an innate immune system. They have acquired immunity, making antibodies. What they don't do is suffer from inflammation when they're infected with a virus. So they don't tend to become pathologic or symptomatic or experience disease when they're infected, but the virus can replicate and shed as it would while the bat's immune system is clearing it. So they're able to behave pretty normally, flying around, foraging, potentially contaminating food and other environmental situations where we could get exposed to those viruses while their body's clearing it. And that is one of the big reasons we understand that they're such good reservoirs for viruses.
Are there infections though that bats are uniquely susceptible though that because, for example, they don't mount that immune response, that inflammatory response, does that actually put them at higher risk of other types of infections?
Well, it's a great question. And to be honest, we don't know a whole lot about what kinds of diseases bats in the wild get that they succumb to other than rabies. So what we started talking about at the top of the show is rabies. That's a virus that bats carry. They are the natural reservoir, but they also succumb to it. It does infect their neurons. It does make its way to their brain and cause disease with specific clinical signs, and it's fatal in bats. So that's one that gets them. There might be others out there, but to be honest, we just haven't done a whole lot of studying as to what is causing bat mortality in nature, because we tend to look for now the pathogens we're concerned about that make us sick, and they tend not to make bats sick.
So how does this link us to cancer? For the average viewer out there, depending on their sort of knowledge of science and health, they may not be aware of the fact that, our immune systems are critically important, not just for fighting, bacteria and viruses, but for clearing cancer from our body. I mean, one of the ways that cancers develop, these mutations in different cell types, one of the reasons they not just develop, but the reason they're able to spread throughout our body is they're often able to evade our immune system. They mimic the body that they're in. So our human body thinks it's not abnormal, and so lets it go away. And one of the ways that, one of the great advances in cancer, in addition to using vaccines to prevent cancer, because there are viruses that lead to cancer them directly, but is also to develop vaccines that are specific for cancers. mRNA platforms are potentially going to give us a vaccine against one of the deadliest forms of cancer, pancreatic cancer. So let's bring this back to bats then. So if bats have this strange immune system where they do have an immune reaction, but they don't necessarily have an inflammatory reaction, what does that mean for them to develop cancer?
So the other part of some bat immune system, which is unique, is they have an upregulation of some antiviral cytokines called interferon, alpha interferon. And so parts of their immune system is ramped up, which helps them fight off viruses. And another part of their immune system, which is upregulated, is something called P53, which is responsible for anti-tumor properties. So it can help cause apoptosis, which kills cells that are replicating out of control and causing a tumor. And this is linked to another really interesting thing about bats. And to talk about their anti-cancer abilities, we have to talk about their longevity. For their size, bats, small, tiny animals, some of the smallest ones are just, 5 grams, 12 grams. Okay, and they range up to about 1 kilogram for those large fruit bats. But some of the smallest bats, particularly species we have here in North America, can live upwards of 30 years in the wild. And that's incredible for an animal that size. In nature, we tend to see that smaller animals have shorter lifespans. Think about rodents who live 3 years, and some, dogs, which are kind of a small, medium-sized mammal, they go anywhere from 7 to 15 years. But 30 years for these tiny bats. And part of the reason we're starting to understand why that happens is they also upregulate certain things, certain cytokines, one of which is telomerase. This is an enzyme that actually is responsible for promoting the replacement of telomeres that get shortened as cells replicate over time. And when telomeres shorten, that's what triggers senescence, or kind of old age in our body cells, and eventually leads to cell death. And it's eventually what's responsible for our body declining and leads to mortality. When cells lose their mortality, when they become immortal, that's when we risk getting tumors, right? That's uncontrolled replication of a certain cell type that can lead to tumors. So bats both have an abundance of this enzyme that promotes cell longevity and replication, and an upregulation of this anti-tumor cytokine that can control things when they seem to get out of hand and start to kill cells that look like they're getting cancerous. And that allows them both to live long and have a reduced incidence of tumors, which is just absolutely incredible. And this all came out in we're talking about this because a paper just came out in Nature Communications by Athar et al. Studying telomerase and p53 properties in bats. And so they looked at multiple different species of bats from disparate families, some found in the Americas, some found in Asia and Africa and the old world. And they're seeing this trend of bats not getting tumors and also living long for their size. Really incredible stuff.
Yeah, it's really fascinating when we think about it. I mean, we're really in a sort of golden age of understanding the role of the immune system and the complexity of the immune system in human cancer. Obviously we've studying it for a very long time as it relates to infections. And this is sort of an interesting kind of like dual use immune system, right? That it has abilities to sort of tolerate viruses, but also to prevent cancers at the same time. And it really does. I mean, it is a fascinating question. I mean, I'm not in the field of developing cancer therapies at all, but I'd be fascinated to know if there are human researchers that are looking to try to see if there are lessons that can be learned from this fascinating mammal that can be used in two areas that are of really important for human health. One is the whole field of cancer, and the other is this incredible amount of work that's going into longevity promotion.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%, Jay. And in fact, there are lots of people from both the human immunology and longevity and cancer research areas, as well as veterinary, looking into this, as well as infectious disease. And the challenge we really have is, in addition to bats being so ecologically important, there's a lot we can learn about how they cope with some of the things that impact our lives. So translational medicine opportunity is incredible. There are very few bat models available to study in the laboratory, and that makes this challenging. So there's been, over the past 10 years or so, there's been development of bat cell lines, which allows people to ask certain questions about, how cells get infected with viruses, or whether, how cells replicate, and that's useful. But you learn a lot more from studying the whole animal, and there just isn't, and there aren't very good lab models to look at this. So I think it's a developing field, one that needs to perhaps develop further to really answer these questions about how can we understand how bats deal with cancer and promote longevity, as well as how they handle infectious diseases.
So is the reason Batman doesn't just like live forever then, I guess? Is that
well, he seems to, right?
Yeah, I guess so. He comes in
into his old age, is still doing it.
I know, exactly. Multiple different characters get to play Batman as well. All right, so Jon, so I definitely have been convinced that bats are fascinating. I'm not so convinced that they're not to be feared, but that's a whole other, deal.
Well, so listen, cave exploration is a beautiful thing. And if you're next on a family trip and a cave trip comes up, all you need to do is put on the right PPE, get a respirator on, some eye protection, you're golden. But I think more importantly, it really speaks to, and this is something I want to say, sincerely, is that it speaks to the importance of protecting bats and their habitat. So many of these infectious diseases, these zoonotic viruses emerge because of our incursion into bat habitats, or the disruption of habitats, whether it's through deforestation or mining activities or entering caves. That's when we get exposed to these viruses quite accidentally. And because bats are so important, if we just learn to live more safely with them, learn to live among them in a smarter way, and be less destructive to the environment, it's going to promote our own health as well, and protect us from infection, and limit the opportunity for these viruses to emerge. So it's something we have to keep in mind, that a solution is never to exterminate bats. We can't try to get rid of them as a solution for infectious disease, but rather to understand what viruses they might be carrying, and really understand what we can do to avoid exposure.
And, Jon, it turns out that you are actually in the New York Times today talking about your love of bats. Is that right?
Well, there was an interesting study that was just put out into preprint. A researcher in Uganda got some really interesting footage of a well-known cave and tourist site, Python Cave in Uganda, which is full of a species of bat called Egyptian rosette bats, Rosetus aegyptiacus, which are a known reservoir for Marburg virus, which is related to Ebola. So this is a cave that's been studied ecologically and for Marburg virus for years and years by CDC, some really great scientists over there studying the ecology of Marburg virus. And these bats, again, they're fruit bats. They're important ecologically, but they're known to carry this virus. And people get Marburg when they walk into the cave and get exposed to viral particles in the air. Well, so here we have footage of different wildlife species going into the cave to hunt and eat bats. Everything from leopard and servals to baboons and other monkeys and vulture and a monitor lizard. And why that's interesting and important is so often we know really little about wildlife interactions and how pathogens might spill over from a reservoir species, like in this case bats, to other mammals, to other animals. And so it really illustrates in an important way the kinds of interactions that probably occur frequently. So if hypothetically we were ever to recognize, a baboon outbreak of Marburg virus, we could think back to studies like this and say, right, we know there's contact with the reservoir instead of wondering. And it makes me think back to the Ebola outbreaks of the early 2000s in Congo and Central Africa, where hunters who went into the forest and harvested great apes, chimpanzees, and gorillas would sometimes find dead carcasses and bring those back to consume. And it turns out that sometimes those great apes had died of Ebola and were still infectious. And so they're not a reservoir for Ebola, but this was how people were getting infected. And we have lots of evidence for big die-offs of great apes in the 2000s, chimpanzees and gorillas, and a lot of evidence that Ebola virus comes from bats, and particularly some fruit bats. But we don't know how those animals might have been exposed. Was it picking up fruit off the forest floor? Were they scavenging around a bat roost? So going back to why these types of studies and film footage are important, it allows us to observe, to really understand wildlife interactions that normally are cryptic or happen outside of our view.
Good. So it's reinforcing that animals shouldn't be going into caves, nor should humans.
Just like you. We're not wearing PPE. That's the problem.
That was my takeaway message. All right, Jon, I really appreciate the discussion. I hope for the viewers out there, this is a little different than what we've done before, but I do think it gives, hopefully all of you out there kind of a message that Jon and I have been, trying to spend for all of our careers, which is that the health of humans cannot be separated from the health of every other living organism around this, animals, plants, et cetera. And so the more we actually understand, not just human health, but animal health, environmental health, the better we're going to keep our planet alive, not just for us, but for generations to come.
It's well said, and great message. So yeah, thanks for this. I really enjoyed this. I hope we do more like this, and could do 5 more episodes on this.
All right, we'll find a way to bring bats back into discussion sooner. So if you enjoy discussing bats or infectious diseases in public health, please hit the like button. Please subscribe. Please share this episode with anybody in your life. It really helps and supports us. And we hope to see you back next time for another episode of Thermometer.
Have a great week. Take care, Jay.